Hey baby, it's Mama June. Today I'm gonna tell you the story of Mrs. Carter, my neighbor across the street, and an old family friend. To the whole block, she was that lady who never left the window, the one everybody swore was in everybody else's business. But what happened on our street one night turned all those jokes into straight-up shame, and it changed the way I look at nosy people forever. Everyone thought she was just nosy until that night. Now, when I first moved onto that street, I wasn't trying to get mixed up in anybody's drama. I had my little hatchback full of boxes, my cheap Walmart curtains in a bag, and at least I prayed I could actually keep paying. New job, new neighborhood, same old bills. I remember stepping out of the car, stretching my back, and just taking in the block, trees leaning over the road, cracked sidewalks, kids' chalk drawings half washed off the concrete. People always tell you, you'll love it here, everyone's friendly, right? They say that in every neighborhood brochure like it's a law. And to be fair, the folks on that street tried. Within the first hour, I had 3 different neighbors wandering over to introduce themselves, half nosy, half helpful, doing that thing where they pretend they just happen to be outside. Hey there, you must be June, right? That was Miss Denise from 2 houses down, walking over with a dish towel still on her shoulder like she'd been mid-cooking. Behind her came Mr. Dale, pretending he was just taking out the trash, even though his bag was clearly empty. You know the type, professional small talkers. They pointed out where to park so I wouldn't get passive-aggressive notes on my windshield. Told me which trash guys would toss your cans if you pissed them off. Warned me about the raccoons that apparently had a personal vendetta against unsecured lids. And then, every single one of them did the same thing. They pointed across the street, up to the 2nd floor window, and dropped their voice like they were telling me a ghost story. Over there, that's Mrs. Carter, Miss Denise said, lowering her tone like the woman could hear us through the glass. She's always at that window. Don't let her freak you out. She just likes to watch. Mr. Dale chuckled. Neighborhood security cameras right there. She knows who comes and goes better than the landlord. We call her the FBI. They laughed, and I laughed with them, because what else do you do when you're the new girl dragging boxes and trying not to look like you made a mistake moving in? But even while I was laughing, I glanced up, and there she was, 2nd floor. Thin figure pressed close to the glass, curtains parted just enough that you could see the pale side of her face. She had this old blue mug in her hand, chipped on one side, and her eyes were focused out on the street like she was trying to memorize every single car, every person, every little thing. Our eyes met for half a second, and I swear it felt like she could see right through my smile. I gave a small nod, the polite "hey neighbor" nod, and she did this tiny, almost shy one back, then let the curtain fall just a little more. See, Miss Denise muttered, always watching. Don't mind her. She doesn't have anything better to do. I shrugged it off. I had boxes to move, a sore back, and about 12 family members texting me, send pics of the new place. Like I didn't still have bubble wrap taped to my shoes. But even while I was wrestling a box of mismatched plates up the front steps, I could feel it, that little prickle between your shoulder blades that says somebody's paying attention. That night, I shoved the last box into a corner and found my bed under a pile of laundry baskets, I stood at my own living room window for a minute. The street was soft and quiet, streetlights throwing yellow circles on the pavement. Porch lights flicked off one by one, and across the way, in that same second floor window, a soft glow. Mrs. Carter was there. Same mug, same silhouette, like she never ran out of things to stare at. I remember rolling my eyes and grabbing my phone. Texted my sister, "Girl, my new neighbor literally lives in her window." I swear she just scanned my whole life in 5 seconds. My sister sent back a bunch of laughing emojis and free security. "Sis, stop complaining." So I told myself that it's free security. She's just bored. She's just lonely. Because that's easier, right? It's easier to label somebody than to ask why they're really like that. Over the next couple weeks, I started seeing her everywhere without her ever leaving that window. Morning, I'd back my car out at 7:30, iced coffee in hand, eyes still half shut, and there she'd be, peeking through the curtain. Afternoon deliveries. UPS truck pulls up. She's there writing something in a little notebook on the sill. Late at night, when I get home tired and cranky, headlights sweeping across the houses, her shadow, S in the same spot, like she's clocked in for the night shift. Neighbors kept the jokes going. The kids on the block. Oh, they thought she was hilarious. I overheard one little boy whisper to another, "Don't kiss your girlfriend outside. Mrs. Carter will tell your mom." Another kid goes, "She got neighborhood X-ray vision, bro. She sees through walls." Grown folks weren't much better. On Saturdays, when people dragged out lawn chairs and cheap beer, somebody would always point at her window and say something slick. "She's probably writing a whole book about us. She knows what time you come home and who you come home with. Man, if I ever commit a crime, remind me not to do it on the street." Everyone said it like a joke, but there was always this edge, annoyance, a little bit of fear, because deep down, people don't like being seen that clearly. I started playing my own little mental game with her. If I caught her looking, I'd count how long she held my gaze before she turned away. Sometimes she'd look for just a second and disappear behind the curtain like she was embarrassed. Other times, she'd stare right back, eyes calm, not rude, but not apologizing either. One afternoon, I was bringing in groceries, arms full, keys dangling from my mouth, being my usual graceful self when I dropped a bag. Oranges went rolling down the front steps like they were trying to escape my entire life. I cursed under my breath, set the other bags down, and was halfway through chasing produce when I heard a voice behind me. "Here, honey, let me help you with that." I turned, and there she was, not in the window for once, but on the sidewalk. Up close, Mrs. Carter looked softer than I expected. Her gray hair was pulled back in a low bun, face lined but kind, cardigan buttoned wrong at the top like she'd rushed out. She bent down a little slower than I did, but she still beat me to one of the oranges. "Oh, thank you," I said, laughing at myself. I swear this bag knew I was tired. She handed it to me with a small smile. "First week in, the groceries always win," she said. "You settling in okay, June?" I blinked. "You know my name," she shrugged, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Landlord told me, and I pay attention." She didn't say it like a threat, just like a fact. We piled the rest of the runaways back into the bag, and she walked them up to my door with me. Right as I was about to go inside, she glanced past me, down toward that brown house a few doors away, the one with the crooked curtain. Her eyes lingered there just a second too long. "You keep your doors locked at night, all right," she said quietly. I gave a little laugh. "Yes, ma'am, I'm not trying to get robbed." She didn't laugh back. Her mouth tightened just a little. "Sometimes it's not the robbers you gotta worry about," she murmured. "It's the people everyone thinks are fine." For a second, I thought she might say more. There was this weight behind her eyes, like she was holding a whole story right on the tip of her tongue. But then she just patted my arm, said, "Dinner's probably getting cold, go on in," and turned back toward her house. I watched her walk up her steps, move inside, and no surprise reappear in that upstairs window a few minutes later with her blue mug. Watching, always watching. I closed my door, shook my head, and told myself, she's just one of those dramatic old ladies. Every neighborhood's got one. I turned on my TV, stirred my boxed mac and cheese, and tried to focus on my own little world. What I didn't realize was that while I was busy trying not to be nosy, Mrs. Carter was paying attention to the one house everyone else had decided to ignore. She wasn't just looking at the street because she was bored. She was checking times, noticing patterns, waiting for something she was terrified might happen again. Back then, I thought she was just another bored neighbor with too much time on her hands. I joked about her. I rolled my eyes when I saw her silhouette at night. If I had paid more attention to what she was really watching, that night might have gone very, very differently. Chapter 2 will build out the world of the block, the daily rhythm, and the early patterns that Mama June and Mrs. Carter notice, while planting red flags for later. If you just glanced at our street from Google Maps, you'd think it was the most regular place on earth. Little curved road, trees lined up like they were placed there by some city planner who actually cared once, and houses that all looked like they were copy-pasted with slightly different colors. Nothing about it screamed trouble. On a good day, it felt like a sitcom set. You had kids drawing hopscotch squares, so crooked you'd twist an ankle trying to use them. Somebody's sprinkler would always be broken and spraying the sidewalk instead of the yard. There was that one house with way too many garden gnomes, like they were slowly planning a takeover. If you drove through at the right time, golden hour, music faint in the background, grill smoke curling up, you'd swear life there was sweet. Most mornings, I'd stand in my kitchen, coffee mug in hand, watching the block wake up. Dogs dragging half-asleep owners down the sidewalk. Parents hustling kids into cars with backpacks half unzipped. Delivery trucks starting their rounds, big and loud. The usual chaos. And of course, up in that second floor window across the street, Mrs. Carter. Same spot, same blue mug, different sweater maybe. Sometimes a scarf if the weather was playing games, but always there, posted up like the sun didn't rise until she opened those curtains. At first, I treated her like part of the scenery, like the big oak tree on the corner or the dent in the stop sign somebody hit 3 years ago. I'd see her and think, yep, she's still on duty, then go back to my eggs and toast. But once you start paying attention, You can't stop. And slowly, I began noticing that she didn't just watch. She watched intentionally. When the Sanchez boys came flying out of their driveway on their bikes without helmets, she leaned forward like she was counting how fast they were going. When the mailman started bringing envelopes with red letters on the outside to the house next to theirs, she wrote the time down in that little notebook. When a delivery driver left a package on a porch and a teenager from down the block started eyeing it, she slid her window open just enough to say, "Baby, that one doesn't have your name on it." The boy jumped like he'd seen a ghost and walked away real quick. Package saved. Nosy saved somebody a stolen phone that day. It wasn't all serious, though. Some evenings, she'd call down at kids playing too close to the street. "Jamal, get yourself out that road before I tell your mama. Kayla, don't you throw that ball at that window. I see you winding up." The kids would groan but listen, because everybody knew Mrs. Carter didn't bluff. If she said she was calling your mama, that phone was already halfway dialed. One Saturday, when the weather finally decided to act right, the whole block seemed to be outside. Grills lit, lawn chairs dragged out, music playing from someone's Bluetooth speaker that kept losing connection. I was sitting on my little porch with a paper plate of food, watching folks move through the street like it belonged to all of us. Mr. Dale was arguing with the grill like it personally offended him. Miss Denise was handing out lemonade to kids who'd already had enough sugar to launch into orbit. Two teenage girls filmed TikToks by the curb, practicing the same dance 15 times in a row. Somebody pointed up at Mrs. Carter's window and called out, "You coming down? Or you just gonna watch us like a TV show, Miss C?" She cracked the window open, sticking her head out just enough to be seen. "I'll come down when y'all learn how to season food properly," she yelled back. Everybody hollered. Laughter rolled through the street, big and warm. Mrs. Carter smiled, shook her head, and closed the window again, disappearing back into the glow of her living room. I couldn't help but laugh, too. She wasn't mean. She wasn't cold. She was sharp, present, too present maybe, for people who liked pretending no one could see their mess. And yet, even in the middle of all that easy joking, there was one house that stayed strangely quiet. That brown one, with the siding that always looked one good rain away from peeling off. Curtains always pulled a little too tight. Driveway usually empty during the day, but somehow full at odd hours of the night. I'd catch glimpses of the people who lived there. A man with shoulders always a little hunched forward, like he was bracing for something. A woman who moved fast from the car to the front door like she was trying to shrink herself into the smallest possible shape. Sometimes a kid's bike would be leaned against the steps, but I almost never saw the kid riding it. When packages came, they disappeared quickly. No one lingered outside. No casual lawn chair talks. No "hey neighbor" waves. Just in and out, door shut, blinds closed. Most folks did what humans do best when something feels off. They pretended not to notice. It's not our business. They keep to themselves. Everybody's got problems. You'd hear lines like that tossed around when their house came up in conversation, if it came up at all. People liked easy topics. Weather, parking, the new coffee shop down the road. Not the strange heaviness that seemed to hang around that one house like a fog. But Mrs. Carter, she noticed. I could tell. Whenever a car pulled up there late, creeping slow with its headlights off, I'd see her shift in her window. Her posture went from relaxed to straight, eyes locked, mug forgotten. If voices got even a little too loud over there, her curtain would move just a hair wider. Sometimes I'd see that notebook of hers open, pen poised, waiting. One evening, I was out front wrestling with my trash can lid because, of course, the raccoons had declared war again when I glanced down the street. The sun was setting, turning everything this soft orange pink. Kids were still out, but their games had gotten slower, lazier, like they knew bedtime was coming. That's when I saw it. Mrs. Carter, standing not at her usual window perch, but on her front porch, arms folded, eyes fixed on that brown house. Her face looked tight, like she was chewing on something she didn't want to swallow. I rolled the trash can to the curb and walked over a few steps. "Evening," I called. She blinked, pulled out of whatever thought she'd been sinking in, and gave me a small smile. "Evening, June," I followed her gaze. The brown house's porch light was flickering, going on and off like it couldn't decide how much of itself to show. Shadows moved behind the front window, quick and jittery. "Something wrong?" I asked. Mrs. Carter hesitated, then shook her head like she was arguing with herself. "Just watching," she said. "Old habit." I laughed lightly. "You do like to watch, huh?" She looked at me then, really looked, the joke landing flat on her face. "Baby," she said quietly, "somebody on every street has to. Too many folks only see what they want to see." The way she said it made my smile fade. There was history in that line, something deeper than nosiness or boredom. But before I could ask more, a kid called my name from down the block, waving a stray soccer ball they'd kicked into my yard. I turned for just a second to kick it back, and when I looked again, she was already heading inside, closing her door softly behind her. The next few days, the block went back to its usual rhythm. Garbage trucks at sunrise, leaf blowers roaring when nobody asked for them, teenagers playing music a little too loud from their cars, pretending not to notice every adult on the porch giving them the look. I went to work, came home, microwaved leftovers, lived my little routine. But I started catching more of those small moments, like the time a delivery guy left a heavy box on Miss Denise's porch, and 2 middle school kids hovered way too long near it. I watched from my window, debating if I should step out, when I heard a faint squeak, and then Mrs. Carter's voice, clear and firm from above. "Y'all don't touch that box. Your mama didn't order it, and your names ain't on it. Keep walking." Those boys' heads snapped up like somebody had aimed a spotlight at them. They shuffled away real fast, hands in pockets, trying to act like they weren't about to do exactly what she'd caught them thinking. Or the afternoon a car I'd never seen before rolled through slow, real slow, driver staring at houses like he was shopping for something that wasn't on sale. My stomach prickled, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Carter didn't. She shifted in her window, pulled out that notebook, and wrote down the license plate like she'd been doing it her whole life. Then she just kept watching until the car finally turned the corner and disappeared. There was this one moment that really stuck with me. I was on my couch, half asleep, TV murmuring in the background, when I heard muffled arguing outside. Not shouting yet, just that tight, angry tone people use right before they lose it. I muted the TV and listened. It was coming from the general direction of the brown house. I couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm: accusation, defense, accusation, silence. My hand went to the remote, then dropped. I told myself, it's probably nothing. Couples argue. I tried to focus back on the show, but the sound sat in my chest like a weight. For some reason, I glanced across the street. In her window, Mrs. Carter stood perfectly still, lights behind her casting her in shadow. She wasn't sipping anything, wasn't writing. She was just listening. There was something in her posture I hadn't noticed before. Not curiosity, not judgment, fear, like she was hearing an echo of something she'd heard in another house, another life, a long time ago. I remember thinking, man, she really is in everybody's business. I remember rolling my eyes, and I remember turning my TV back up, pretending it wasn't my problem. That's the part that haunts me now, if I'm being real with you. Not that I didn't know, but that I low-key did know something was off, and chose comfort over curiosity. While I was trying not to be that nosy neighbor, Mrs. Carter was up there quietly logging our street like a one-woman security system, writing down patterns, times, lights, sounds, seeing the pieces of a picture the rest of us refused to admit was forming. From the outside, it looked like just another block, just another old lady who never left her window. But looking back, the red flags were already fluttering all over that street. We just walked right past them, eyes straight ahead, telling ourselves everything was fine. Mrs. Carter, though, she'd already decided she wasn't looking away. Yes, and from chapter 3 onward, the tension needs to climb steadily. Chapter 3, red flags nobody saw the night it really started. Nothing looked special at first. It was one of those regular Tuesdays where the day drags forever. And then suddenly, it's 10 p.m. and you don't even remember what you ate for dinner. I was in my living room, laptop open, pretending to finish some work, while really scrolling through the same 3 apps like they were gonna show me a new life if I refreshed enough. Outside, the street was quiet in that cozy way TV glows in windows. One porch light here, one there. A car rolling by every 10 minutes or so. Rain wasn't falling yet, but the clouds were thick and low, like the sky was holding its breath. I had some show mumbling in the background, light low, candles still burning from earlier, because I kept forgetting to blow them out. Then I heard it, not loud at first, just a sound that didn't fit. It was this sharp crack, like something heavy hitting a wall or a door slamming too hard. It came from down the street, same direction as that brown house with the crooked curtain. The sound made my shoulders jerk up, fingers hovering over my keyboard. I muted the TV. That's always the first move, right? Not to do something, just to listen. For a second, there was nothing. Then I heard it muffled shouting, a man's voice, low and mean, like he was trying to keep it down but couldn't quite control himself. A woman's voice higher, trying to talk over him or around him. I couldn't catch the words, just the tone. And that tone, it put ice water right in my chest. I stood up and walked to my window, easing 2 fingers under the edge of the blinds. The street outside looked almost peaceful, which somehow made it creepier. Porch lights glowing, wet shine already on the road from a drizzle that must have started without me noticing. Nothing obviously wrong, except that brown house. One upstairs window lit, that same curtain pulled crooked. Shadows moving behind it too fast, too jerky. Even from my place, I could see someone pacing, arms flying up, another shape shrinking back. I felt my heart pound harder. You ever get that feeling where your whole body knows something is off before your brain agrees? That's where I was. My first thought wasn't noble. It was, let me help. It was, I really don't want to get dragged into some mess tonight. My eyes slid across the street almost on their own, up to the second floor window that had become part of my mental map of the neighborhood. Mrs. Carter was already there. Of course she was, but she looked different that night. No blue mug, no relaxed lean. She was right up against the glass, both hands pressed on the sill, her body angled toward the brown house like a compass needle. Her face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed in a way I hadn't seen before. She wasn't just watching, she was tracking. From where I stood, I could see her lips moving. At first, I thought she was talking to herself, but then I saw the little rectangle glow of her phone in one hand. She was already on a call. I couldn't hear her words, but I could read the urgency in her shoulders. Whatever was happening over there in her mind, it had crossed a line. I swallowed, throat suddenly dry. My brain started trying to calm me down. Maybe it's just an argument. Couples fight all the time. It's late, they're stressed. You're being dramatic. Chill out. But underneath that little internal lecture, another voice whispered, "It doesn't sound right." And you know it. The shouting rose for a second, still muffled, but sharper now. Then a crash, something breaking. Then a sound that made my skin crawl, a choked-off cry, then silence. My hand tightened around the blind cord. I took half a step back from the window, like distance would make me less responsible. Because here's the thing nobody likes to admit. Sometimes it's easier to convince yourself you didn't really hear what you heard than to accept you might have to do something about it. I caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye and looked back at Mrs. Carter. She had grabbed that notebook off the sill, flipping it open with quick, practiced hands. She wrote something down, time maybe, or what she'd heard, then went right back to the phone. Her lips were set in this thin, angry line. I realized then that this wasn't the first time she'd heard something over there. And it sure wasn't the first line she'd written about that house. Still, I stood there, stuck. Do I call too? Do I go outside? What would I even say? Hi, I heard a vibe. Can someone come vibe check this house? The fear of looking stupid, of being dramatic, had its hand tight around my mouth. I stepped away from the window, walked around my coffee table, then circled back like a caged animal. Every sound from outside felt louder. A car door in the distance made me flinch. A dog barked 2 houses over, and I almost jumped. I thought about all the times people had told me stories of its not that bad relationships that turned out to be worse than they'd ever admitted. I thought about the way the woman from that brown house moved, always quick, always small, always looking down. I remembered Mrs. Carter telling me, sometimes it's not the robbers you gotta worry about. It's the people everyone thinks are fine. That line hit different now. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few minutes, the noise from the brown house dropped off. No more shouting. No more weird thuds. Just silence. That silence scared me more than the noise. I peeked out again. The upstairs light was off now. Porch light still flickering. No movement. Mrs. Carter was still at her window, phone finally down. Eyes locked on that house like she could see straight through the walls. She looked haunted, like she was watching a rerun of something she'd hoped to never see again. The next morning, the neighborhood acted like nothing had happened. Trash cans at the curb, people in work clothes rushing to cars, dogs doing their morning business, kids whining about school. Regular life performing like it always does. Outside my door, I ran into Miss Denise. She was in her robe and slippers, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. "Morning, June," she said, voice a little too cheerful. "Morning," I replied. I hesitated. "You, hear anything weird last night?" She blinked, then shrugged. "Oh, you know how it is with that house," she said, dropping her voice. "They're always fussing about something. I just turn my TV up. Not my business, you feel me?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "Not my business." Those 3 words sat wrong in my mouth now. She leaned closer. "But let something really bad be going on," she said. "Mrs. Carter would handle it. That woman hears a fly sneeze out here. If there was real trouble, she'd have already had the cops out." She laughed and took a sip of coffee, like she hadn't just handed all responsibility over to the lady in the window. Like that was her job, not ours. I looked up at Mrs. Carter's window out of habit. She was there, same as always. But when our eyes met this time, something in her face had changed. There was a new layer of tired there. Not just physical tired, the tired that comes from seeing too much and being believed too little. Later that day, I took some mail to the box at the corner and timed it just right on my way back. She was stepping out to her porch. I paused at the bottom of her steps. "Morning, Mrs. Carter," I said. "You doing okay?" She studied me for a second, like she was trying to decide how much truth I could handle. Finally, she nodded. "I'm all right," she said. "You sleep okay?" "Mostly," I said carefully. "Heard some stuff last night." I jerked my chin lightly toward the brown house. Eyes flicked that way, then back to me. "You heard it too?" she asked quietly. I swallowed. "Yeah." She took a breath, shoulders rising, falling slow. "Sometimes it's hard to know when to step in," I said, words tumbling out faster than I meant. "I mean, people argue. I don't want to call for nothing. But it didn't sound like for nothing, did it?" She finished for me. I shook my head. She glanced back at her door, then at me. "I've been paying attention to that house for a long time," she said. "Longer than most people admit they noticed anything at all." "Have you ever called before?" I asked, her lips pressed together. "Once," she said. "Last year. Told them I heard something that didn't sit right. They came, knocked on the door, talked to them for 5 minutes, then left." She shrugged, but there was bitterness in it. "They decided it was a domestic dispute, nothing major. Told me they'd keep an eye out." She looked back up at her window. "So I kept my eye out," she murmured. We stood there in the morning air, cars passing, birds doing their thing, while something heavy hung between us. "I don't want to be that neighbor," I said after a moment. "The one everybody rolls their eyes at. The one they say is doing too much." She looked me dead in the face, voice soft but firm. "Baby, I used to care about that too," she said, "until the day I needed somebody to do too much for me, and nobody did a thing." That sentence sat in my chest like a stone. Before I could ask, "What happened?" she shook her head, almost like she'd felt the question forming. "That's a long story for another day," she said, "but take some advice from a woman who learned it the hard way. You will never lose sleep over being wrong because you cared. You will lose sleep over being quiet when you knew better." I didn't have an answer for that. All I could do was nod. She patted my arm gently, that grandmotherly gesture that somehow made me feel about 12 years old again. Then she turned and went back inside, up to her window, notebook ready. After that conversation, I couldn't unhear things anymore. Every car door slam near that house made me pause. Every muffled shout made my shoulders tense automatically. My brain still tried to talk me down. "You're overthinking. Let it go. You don't know the full story." But my gut had its own opinion now, and it sounded a whole lot like Mrs. Carter's voice. The rest of the neighborhood kept doing what it always did. Jokes about the FBI lady in the window. Shrugs about the brown house. That lazy, comfortable denial people wrap around themselves like a blanket. But from my window, and from hers, the picture was getting clearer. The nights were getting louder. The woman in that brown house was getting quieter. And the red flags, they weren't small anymore. They were waving right in front of our faces. Most of the block still chose not to see them. Mrs. Carter wrote them down. Only one of those choices was going to matter on the night everything snapped. This chapter will be written to stay roughly around your 1,200-word target while keeping tension high and pacing tight. Chapter 4, The Night. Everything snapped by the time that Friday rolled around. The whole week already felt wrong. You know those weeks where every little thing is just slightly off. Coffee tastes weaker, traffic feels meaner, your phone keeps dying at 20% for no reason. That was the vibe. The sky had been gray for 3 days straight, heavy with the kind of storm that makes your joints ache before it even hits. That evening, I decided I was staying home. No errands, no late-night Walmart runs, no pretending I had more energy than I did. I threw on my oldest t-shirt, some soft leggings, and made myself a plate of leftovers that looked better in my imagination than it did on the plate. I turned on the TV more for company than anything, let some reality show ramble in the background, and settled into my couch. Outside, the street started to dim. Porch lights blinked on one by one. Kids' voices faded as parents called them in, that same chorus of, "You got school tomorrow." Even though some of them absolutely did not, it was the weekend. The air felt thick, warm, and still, like the whole block was waiting on something. Around 9:30, the first rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. It wasn't loud yet, just a warning. Rain started as a light sprinkle, soft patter on the windows, that smell of wet concrete drifting in through the small crack under my front door. I actually sighed and relaxed a little. There's something about rain that makes you feel like the world is slowing down with you. I wish that's where the night had stayed. A little after 10, the lights in my place flickered. TV cut out for a second, came back, Then the lamp next to me dimmed before steadying again. I muttered, "Don't start," at the ceiling like the power company could hear me. For a moment, everything was quiet except the steady drumming of rain that had picked up, now hitting the windows hard enough to sound like fingers tapping. I grabbed my phone to check the weather app, even though I already knew what it would say. Severe storm alert in your area. Sure enough, big red box, dramatic wording, the whole thing. I put the phone down on the coffee table, and that's when I heard it. Not thunder, not the rain, something else cutting through it all, a scream. It wasn't long. It wasn't movie loud. It was short and sharp, like somebody tried to swallow it halfway through. But it was enough to freeze me in place. It came from down the street, from that brown house. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I muted the TV without even looking at it, the sound dying mid-sentence. For a second, the only noise in the room was the rain and my own breathing. Then I heard yelling, a man's voice, rough and angry, trying to talk over someone. A woman's voice higher, cracking in the middle of words I couldn't make out. A heavy thud, like something or someone hit a wall or the floor. My mind shot straight to denial, because that's what it had been trained to do. Maybe the TV's loud over there. Maybe they dropped something. Maybe it's none of my business. But my body knew better. I was already up, feet on the floor, moving toward the window with that sick feeling in my gut. I eased the blinds open just enough to see. Outside, the storm had fully arrived. Rain came down in sheets, bouncing off the street, blurring headlights from passing cars into streaks of white and red. Most of the houses had their curtains drawn, lights glowing faintly behind them. Our little block looked like it was curled up, trying to ride the storm out. Except for that brown house. Its porch light glowed harsh and too bright against the rain, flickering every few seconds. The front door was closed, but the upstairs window, the one I'd watched too many times, was lit. Shadows moved violently behind the curtain, jerky and fast, shapes colliding and pulling apart. I couldn't see faces. I couldn't hear full sentences. But the energy spilling out of that house was ugly. My stomach twisted. Every instinct screamed that this was not just a regular argument. This wasn't the normal fussing every couple does. This was something that could go left fast. Before I even thought about it, my eyes went where they always did when something felt off. Up across the street to the second floor window of Mrs. Carter's house. She was there. Of course she was. But she wasn't in her usual relaxed pose, leaning on one elbow, mug in hand, like she was half watching a show. This time, she was standing rigid, body angled forward, one hand braced on the sill like she was trying to hold herself back from jumping through the glass. In her other hand, her phone glowed bright against the dark room behind her. I could see her talking, her mouth moving fast. Her eyes kept darting between the brown house and the street, like she was timing something. Waiting, listening. For a heartbeat, our eyes met through the rain and the glass and the night. I saw fear there. Not surprise, fear. Recognition. Like this scene was a nightmare she'd seen before in another place, another time. I didn't have the volume of the world's bravest person in that moment. I was scared. Scared of doing too much. Scared of not doing enough. Scared of finding out something I couldn't unknow. My mind raced. Should I call too? What do I even say? Hi, I think something bad is happening, but I can't prove it. What if I'm wrong? What if they come out here and it's nothing and now I'm that neighbor forever? I took a step back from the window, then forward again, then back, like somehow pacing in my tiny living room was going to shake an answer loose. The yelling from the brown house spiked, one word cutting clear through the storm. Stop, the woman's voice. Sharp, broken, panicked. Then a heavy thump. Silence. That silence felt louder than any of the noise before it. I realized I was shaking. My hands, my knees, even my breath had that unsteady tremble. My whole body knew that whatever had just happened over there was not okay. I grabbed my phone with clumsy fingers, screen lighting up my anxious face. My thumb hovered over the keypad. I pictured the operator asking me questions I didn't have answers to. What exactly did you see? What exactly did you hear? I pictured trying to describe it. Well, I heard something. I saw shadows. A neighbor is already calling, I think. It sounded flimsy, even in my own head. I looked up again. Mrs. Carter was still on the phone, but her posture had shifted. She wasn't frantic now, she was focused, resolute, the kind of calm that comes when you've already made the decision to act and there's no turning back. Her notebook lay open on the sill beside her, pages flipping slightly in the air from the vent. She stabbed a finger down at a line, reading something off to whoever was on the other end. Dates, times, history. I realized she wasn't just calling about tonight. She was calling about everything. All the nights before this one that we'd heard and ignored. All the little moments that made a pattern. She had proof on paper for the thing my gut only now found the courage to admit. Outside, in the middle of all that, the storm stepped it up. Lightning flashed, throwing the whole street into a harsh, white snapshot. For a split second, I could see the outline of someone at the brown house's upstairs window, small, hunched, hand pressed against the glass. Then darkness again, followed by thunder that shook my windows in their frames. I don't know how long we all stayed frozen in that moment. Me at my blinds, Mrs. Carter at hers, that house holding its breath. Then, faint at first, from somewhere beyond our little bubble, came a sound I will never forget. Sirens. They started as a distant wail, barely cutting through the rain. But they grew louder, closer, winding through the neighborhood streets. Red and blue light began to flicker against the low clouds, reflecting in the puddles gathering at the curb. I stepped out onto my porch without really deciding to. Rain hit my face in cold, sharp drops, soaking through my t-shirt in seconds. The air smelled like wet asphalt and something electric. At the end of the block, a police cruiser turned onto our street, lights flashing, tires hissing on the slick road. Right behind it, an ambulance's lights spun, siren crying out over the storm. They moved faster than I expected, pulling up right in front of the brown house. Doors flew open. Officers stepped out, hoods pulled up against the rain, moving with that mix of urgency and training. Paramedics grabbed bags and equipment, heads low as they ran up the path. Rain bounced off their shoulders, off the steps, off the railing that led to the front door. I stood there, rooted to the spot, water dripping down my neck, watching it like it was a scene from a show. It didn't feel real. the cold soaking through my clothes, and the knot in my stomach said otherwise. Across the street, Mrs. Carter had left her window. A few seconds later, her front door opened and she stepped out, umbrella forgotten somewhere because she didn't have one. Rain plastered her sweater to her body, but she didn't seem to notice. She walked slowly but steadily to the edge of her yard, staying just outside the cluster of emergency workers. From where I stood, I could see everything, but hear almost nothing. The officers at the door, the brief exchange before someone swung it open, the paramedics disappearing inside, a neighbor's light flicking on, a curtain pulled back, another door opening down the block as someone else stepped out, drawn by the sirens like I was. Within minutes, our once quiet street was alive with watchers. People who had been able to sleep through shouts and thuds were wide awake now that there were flashing lights and uniforms involved. Blinds cracked, porches filled. Phones appeared in hands, not to call for help, but to record. I didn't pull mine out. I just stood there, arms wrapped around myself, feeling the rain soak me straight through. The ambulance doors were still open, empty. That felt like the scariest part. They hadn't brought anyone out yet. I glanced over at Mrs. Carter. Her face was pale, lips pressed into a tight line, eyes never leaving that front door. Every muscle in her body looked tense, like she was holding herself together sheerly through willpower. Minutes ticked by like hours. Then, finally, movement. The paramedics came back into view, guiding someone between them down the steps. A woman. Her hair was wet and tangled, clothes rumpled, one side of her face turned away from the rest of us. She clutched a blanket around herself, gripping it like it was the only solid thing in the world. Even from a distance, I could see the way she moved, careful, like every step hurt, like she was afraid to take up space. The man from the house followed a moment later, flanked by 2 officers, hands behind his back, head down, jaw tight. He tried to say something to one of them, but whatever it was got swallowed up by the rain and the sirens. The ambulance doors closed softly once the woman was inside. No drama, no big slow motion moment, just a quiet, firm close that felt heavier than any slammed door. The police cruiser's back door shut with a dull thud as the man was placed inside. All around us, neighbors whispered. Some clutched their robes tighter. Some shook their heads like they were watching a disappointing TV finale. Some just stared wide-eyed, as if they couldn't believe something this ugly had happened right under their noses. But the truth was, it hadn't started that night. That night was just when it finally got too loud to ignore. I looked over at Mrs. Carter. She stood there, rain dripping from her hair, curls flattened, cardigan clinging to her shoulders. For a moment, she closed her eyes, like she was praying or trying not to cry. "I told them," she said softly, when I got close enough to hear. "I told them something wasn't right in that house. I told them." I didn't know what to say, so I just stood beside her. 2 women on a soaked sidewalk, watching the aftermath of something we both knew had been building for a long time. In that moment, one thing hit me harder than the storm, harder than the cold. If it weren't for that nosy woman in the window, that ambulance might have been carrying a body bag instead of a breathing woman. If it weren't for her notes, her calls, her refusal to look away, this would have been a crime scene, not a rescue. And standing there, shivering in the rain, I realized just how easy it had been for the rest of us to sleep through the warning signs while she stayed awake. Yes, continuing from the last scene, this chapter will go deeper into what Mrs. Carter had really been doing from that window and why. Chapter 5, the truth about her watching the sirens eventually faded, but the echo of them stayed on our street like a stain. After the ambulance pulled off and the cruiser drove away with its headlights on, but lights off, the block slipped into this weird half-silence. Not the comfortable quiet we had on normal nights. This one felt tight, like the air was holding its breath. People drifted back inside in little clusters. A few neighbors tried to turn it into conversation material right there on the sidewalk. I knew something was off over there. They were always so secretive. I told my husband last month, that man gave me a bad feeling. Funny how nobody had said it loud before the sirens showed up. I didn't feel like joining their little after-show recap. My clothes were soaked clear through, and my brain felt even heavier than my sweater. As I turned to go back toward my house, I noticed Mrs. Carter hadn't moved. She was still standing near the edge of her yard, arms wrapped around herself, gaze fixed on the empty driveway of the brown house. Raindrops streaked down her face, and for once, I couldn't tell where the rain ended and her tears began. "You should go inside. You're gonna get sick," I said softly, stepping closer. She let out a little breath that might have been a laugh, might have been a sob. "Sweetheart, I've been sick over this for months," she replied. "Bit of rain won't make much difference." There was no bite in her voice, just exhaustion. The kind that doesn't come from one night, but from a whole history pressing down on you. "You called them tonight, didn't you?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She nodded, eyes still on that dark doorway. "Wasn't the first time," she said, "but it was the first time they listened like they meant it." We stood there a moment, the sound of the storm softening to a drizzle around us. Lights in other houses clicked off one by one as folks decided they'd seen enough. Our little street was starting to look normal again on the surface, but nothing about it felt normal anymore. "Come on," I said gently. "Let's get you inside. You look freezing." She hesitated, then finally turned away from the house and let me walk with her to her front door. Inside, her place was warm and smelled like lavender and old books, the kind of smell that wraps around you like a blanket. She flicked on a lamp in the living room, and the soft light made the room feel smaller, cozier, almost too intimate for the heaviness hanging in the air. "Sit," she said, gesturing toward the couch. I peeled off my wet jacket and sat on the edge, trying not to drip all over her rug. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with 2 towels. One she tossed over my shoulders. The other she used to pat at her own hair like she remembered she had a body again. For a minute, we just sat there, listening to the rain tap against the window panes. The same window she'd been glued to every day. From this angle, I could see her view half the street, the brown house front and center, every driveway, every porch. It wasn't just a window. It was a front row seat to everybody's life. On the sill beside it lay the notebook I'd seen earlier. Up close, It looked even more worn, edges frayed, cover bent, pages thick from being flipped through so many times. I nodded toward it. "That where you keep everything?" I asked quietly. She followed my gaze, then reached over and picked it up. Her fingers ran along the spine affectionately, like it was an old friend. "This one," she said. "This is just the latest. Got a few more in a box somewhere." She opened it up, and I saw neat, careful handwriting filling every line. Dates in the margins, times in little circles, short phrases, raised voices. 11:37 p.m., crash glass. 12:12 a.m., child crying, stopped too fast. 9:02 p.m., no lights on for 2 days. Car gone. She turned the notebook so I could see better. "This is what I read to the dispatcher," she said. "I told them, I'm not calling you about one fight. I'm calling you about a pattern." I swallowed, eyes scanning the page. There were entries going back weeks, months, little breadcrumbs of something bad happening right under our noses, while the rest of us made jokes and excuses. "You've been keeping track that long?" I asked. She gave a small shrug. "Longer than that," she said. "I started writing things down after well." She paused, staring at the ink like it might rearrange itself into something easier. "After what?" I asked gently. She exhaled slowly, sitting back in her chair like she was about to open a door she usually kept locked. "You know how everyone calls me Nosy," she said. I nodded. "Once upon a time," she continued, "I was the one behind the closed curtains, and my neighbors were the ones pretending they didn't hear anything." She didn't raise her voice, but the words hit with a kind of quiet force. "I was young," she said, "dumber than I thought I was, in love with a man who loved being in control more than he ever loved me." She gave a small, humorless smile. "I got good at covering things up. Long sleeves in summer, big sunglasses. I tripped on the stairs. You know the lines." My chest tightened. "I'd hear my own voice shouting in that house," she went on. "And then I'd hear myself go quiet. You'd be amazed how easy it is to convince people you're okay if you cook enough food and smile at the right times." She looked back out the window, rain streaking little paths down the glass. "One night, things got bad," she said, the words careful, controlled. "I tried to get to the door, but he got there first. I remember thinking if I could just make it outside, someone would have to help me. So I ran out into the yard, barefoot, crying, begging. Lights came on in 3 houses. She held up 3 fingers, then slowly curled them down. Doors never opened, she said softly. Not one. He dragged me back inside while people peeked through their blinds. Next day, they waved like nothing happened. She cleared her throat, voice a little rough now. I told myself after I left that situation that if I ever saw something like that again, I wouldn't be those neighbors. I wouldn't be the one turning the volume up on the TV. If I had to be the crazy woman in the window to make sure somebody wasn't dying behind those walls, then so be it. The room felt very small suddenly, like the weight of that story had sucked all the extra air out. I'm so sorry you went through that, I said quietly. The words felt too small, but they were all I had. She waved a hand gently, not brushing it off, but tucking it away. I survived, she said. Lots don't. The part that still wakes me up sometimes isn't what he did. It's what they didn't. She tapped the notebook with one finger. So now, When I hear something that sounds wrong, I write. When people tell me I'm overreacting, I write. When they say, it's probably just an argument, I write. She looked at me, eyes clear but tired. Tonight, when I called, I read them this, she said. I said, you might think I'm just a neighbor being dramatic, but I've got 3 months of dates and times that say otherwise. And suddenly, they listened a whole lot closer. I sat there, feeling this ugly mix of shame and gratitude in my gut. Shame, because I'd joked about her, because I'd heard some of those nights myself and decided, not my business. Gratitude, because if she hadn't been stubborn enough to keep watching, there might not have been anyone left in that house to help. Does it ever get easier? I asked. Seeing things like that, keeping track. She took a moment before answering. Easier, no, she said, but I sleep better. She glanced down at her hands, at the faint scars there you wouldn't notice unless you were looking. I don't do this because I like drama, she added. I do it because I remember what it felt like to be on the other side of that window, wondering if anybody cared enough to notice. The words sat between us, heavy and real. People can call me nosy all they want, she said, voice firming up. They can make jokes, roll their eyes, close their blinds. They don't have to like me. But tonight, that woman went into an ambulance breathing, not in a bag. If my nosiness had anything to do with that, they can keep talking. I nodded slowly. I think people owe you more than jokes, I said. She smiled sadly. Baby, I stopped waiting on apologies a long time ago, she replied. Now I just count breathing people and count that as my thanks. We sat there in silence for a while, just the sound of rain and the faint hum of the fridge from the kitchen. Outside, the street looked calm again, washed clean by the storm. But nothing about it felt the same. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. As she opened it, I glanced back at the window one more time. That view ever feel like a curse? I asked quietly. She considered the question, then shook her head. Some days, she admitted, but most days it feels like a second chance. Not for me, I already got mine. For whoever needs somebody to see them when they can't say it out loud. I stepped out onto the damp porch, the air cool and fresh after the rain. Across the street, my own windows glowed soft, welcoming. For the first time, I realized how easy my life had been, not having to worry about what was happening on the other side of my own walls. As I crossed back to my house, one thought kept circling my mind, steady and uncomfortable. We all loved the idea of living on a good street. We just didn't want to accept that sometimes the only reason it stays good is because someone like Mrs. Carter refuses to look away when the rest of us do. And that truth, it was about to change the way I moved through that neighborhood for good. Chapter 6. Fallout on the street the morning after the storm. The street tried its hardest to pretend nothing had happened. Birds were back on the power lines, chirping like they hadn't watched red and blue lights bounce off the houses a few hours earlier. Cars eased out of driveways, tires crunching over wet gravel. Somebody's kid was already out front trying to ride a scooter through puddles, getting yelled at for splashing his clothes before school. From my kitchen window, it almost looked like any other day. But you could feel it, that strange, heavy tension that hangs over a place after something real goes down. Like the air remembers, even if people are trying not to. I stood with my coffee, staring at the brown house. The porch light was off. The curtains were still drawn. No car in the driveway. For the first time since I'd moved in, the place looked empty. Across the street, Mrs. Carter's curtains were open, but she wasn't at her post yet. Her window looked wrong without her there, like a lighthouse with no light. I caught myself worrying about her, then grabbed a hoodie and stepped outside. Down by the curb, two neighbors were already huddled together in the universal. We're about to gossip stance, arms folded, heads tilted in. I tried to slip past without getting dragged in, but of course, that didn't happen. "June, girl, did you see all that last night?" Miss Denise called. I forced a small smile. "Hard to miss," I said. The guy next to her, Tom from the corner, the one who always looked 5 minutes late to something, shook his head. "Crazy man," he said. "I had no idea things were like that over there." I almost choked. "You had no idea?" I asked. "You never heard anything?" He shrugged, eyes sliding away. "I mean, I heard stuff," he admitted. "But you know how it is. Couples yell. I mind my business. Last thing I need is to call somebody and be wrong." I thought about all the times Mrs. Carter had heard stuff and written it down instead of turning up her TV. The difference between the two of them made my jaw tight. Miss Denise leaned closer. "They say that woman's staying with a cousin across town for now," she whispered. "Cops were here half the night after y'all went inside, asking questions, taking notes." "Did they talk to you?" I asked. She smoothed down her robe, a little defensive. "I told them what I knew," she said. "Not much to tell. I don't sit in the window like some people." There it was, that little dig. Even with everything that had happened, folks still had energy to take shots at Mrs. Carter. "Speaking of," Tom added, jerking his chin toward her house, "I heard she had some whole notebook on them. Been writing about that house for months. Low key, that's kinda wild, right?" I looked him dead in the eye. "You mean the notebook that helped them take her seriously?" I asked. "The one that probably saved that woman's life?" He blinked, caught off guard. "I mean, yeah, I guess," he said. "Just saying, it's a little intense." I felt my patience snap a little. "Intense is ignoring someone screaming on your street," I said quietly. "Writing it down and calling for help. That's what grown-ups are supposed to do." There was an awkward silence. Miss Denise shifted, suddenly very interested in her slippers. Tom mumbled something about being late and shuffled off toward his car. As I headed back toward my place, I glanced up at Mrs. Carter's window again. This time, she was there, just a shadow at first, then her full silhouette as she stepped closer to the glass. She caught my eye and gave a tiny nod. It wasn't her usual polite nod. It felt more like, "You see it now too, don't you?" A little later, I walked over with a small plate of muffins I'd definitely not baked myself. Store-bought or not, comfort is comfort. She opened the door before I could knock twice. "Morning, June," she said. Her voice was softer than usual, like the night had sanded the edges off. "Brought you something," I said, holding up the plate. "Peace offering for the universe, I guess." She chuckled under her breath and stepped aside to let me in. Living room looked the same as the night before, but there was one new thing on the coffee table, a business card with a police department logo on it, sitting next to that worn notebook. "They come back?" I asked, nodding toward it. She sighed and sank into her usual chair. detective came by this morning," she said. "Wanted to go over my notes again. Asked if I'd be willing to give a statement if it goes to court." "Are you?" She looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "If she needs me to, yes," she said. My voice should have been there for me back then. Might as well show up for somebody else now. We watched the street in silence for a bit. A delivery truck rumbled by. The Sanchez boys chased each other with water guns like nothing ever happens here but childhood. Across the way, a few houses down, an older couple stood on their porch whispering, eyes flicking between Mrs. Carter's window and the brown house like they were trying to decide where to land their judgment. "You hear what folks are saying?" I asked. She smirked without humor. "Oh, honey, I don't have to hear them," she said. "I see it in their faces. Half of them look at me like I'm a hero. Other half look at me like I'm dangerous because I see too much." "That doesn't seem fair," I said. She shrugged. "Fair's got nothing to do with it," she replied. "People don't like being reminded they could have done more. Easier to make me the problem than face the fact that they heard those screams too and rolled over in bed." I thought about the conversations at the curb that morning, all the "I had no idea," and "I just mind my business" lines. She was right. Guilt has a funny way of coming out as attitude. "They're scared of you now," I realized out loud. "Good," she said simply. "Maybe next time they'll be scared enough of being on the wrong side of this to actually pick up the phone themselves." Later that week, the street settled into a new kind of normal. The brown house stayed quiet, blinds closed, mailbox empty. A "for rent" sign appeared on the lawn, bright and bold, and completely unaware of the history rooted in that patch of grass. People still walked their dogs. Kids still argued about whose turn it was on the scooter. But dinner time conversations changed. You could see it in the way neighbors lingered a little longer when they heard raised voices from any direction, not just that house. One evening, I was bringing groceries in when I heard a couple down the street arguing near their car. Nothing like what we'd heard before, more annoyance than danger. But my chest tightened anyway. Old me would have turned my music up. New me stopped, listened for a few seconds, then at least stayed aware instead of rushing inside and pretending I heard nothing. Later, I mentioned it to Mrs. Carter. She nodded approvingly. "That's all it takes sometimes," she said. "Just one person willing to stop and pay attention. Makes it a lot harder for ugly things to grow in the dark." Not everyone adjusted gracefully, though. One afternoon, as I checked my mailbox, I overheard Tom talking to another neighbor. "Man, I don't like knowing she's got notebooks on all of us," he muttered. "What if she's writing every time I come home late or argue with my wife?" The other neighbor laughed nervously. "Then maybe don't act up on the front lawn," he said. I turned around, raised an eyebrow. "If you're not doing anything that can't handle daylight, you shouldn't be losing sleep over a notebook," I said. Tom flushed. "Still feels weird," he grumbled. "You know what feels weirder?" I replied. "Living on a street where someone gets hurt and we all pretend we didn't hear it. I'll take weird over that any day." He didn't have much to say after that. The biggest change, though, wasn't in them. It was in me. I found myself checking on people more. If I hadn't seen the older man at the end of the street in a few days, I'd wave when I finally did. A kid looked upset sitting on the curb, I'd at least ask if they were okay or needed someone. I wasn't barging into folks' business, but I stopped pretending that absolutely none of it had anything to do with me. One Sunday afternoon, I brought over some tea and sat with Mrs. Carter by her window. I asked her, "Do you ever wish you could just stop, close the curtains, ignore it all?" She thought about it. "Sometimes," she said honestly. "Some nights I wish I could unhear things, unsee them, just be an old woman who watches game shows and goes to bed at 9. She took a slow sip from her mug, then shook her head. "But then I think about that girl last week," she continued. "The way she clutched that blanket, the way her shoulders finally dropped when they put her in that ambulance and closed the doors, like she realized she wasn't going back in that house. And I remember standing in my own yard years ago, wondering if anyone would ever open their door for me." She set the mug down. "I can't go back in time and change what happened to me," she said, "but I can damn sure be the neighbor I needed back then. So if that means I'm the nosy lady in the window until the day I die, I'll take it." Sitting there beside her, watching our street through that same frame she'd used for so long, I felt something settle inside me. A kind of responsibility I couldn't unfeel now. We like to think a good neighborhood is about nice lawns and quiet nights. But really, it's about whether we're willing to see each other, to hear the bad stuff, not just the block party music and kids' laughter. Mrs. Carter had been doing that alone for a long time. Now I knew better. I couldn't go back to being the girl who turned the TV up and pretended the yelling next door was not her business. Not after I'd watched a woman walk out of a nightmare because one person refused to look away. And in that way, the night everything snapped didn't just change that house. It changed me. It changed how I saw every window on that street, mine included. Everyone thought she was just nosy until that night. And once you see the truth behind that, you can't unsee it. Chapter 7. Outcome and Reflection. The brown house didn't stay empty forever. A few weeks after the storm, the "For Rent" sign out front got a bright red leased sticker slapped across it. Bold like the past didn't matter. Young couple moved in, all smiles and cardboard boxes, and trips back and forth from a borrowed pickup truck. They had a baby, maybe a year old, with cheeks so round you just wanted to squeeze them, and a dog that barked at every leaf like it was a personal threat. From my window, I watched them carry in a crib, a high chair, a lamp with little clouds on the shade. They laughed when the dog slipped on the wet steps. They kissed casually on the porch before going back to unload more boxes. It looked normal, the kind of normal that felt almost loud after everything that had happened there. I caught myself holding my breath as I watched them. Not because I expected the worst, but because I knew what those walls had heard before. I kept waiting for some echo of that night, raised voices, heavy thuds, that awful kind of silence. But days passed, then weeks, and all I heard was a baby crying, laughter, and the occasional "Babe, where'd you put the charger?" One afternoon, the new woman caught me looking as she buckled her baby into a car seat. I waved, embarrassed at myself, and she smiled back. "Hi," she called. "We're still getting settled. I'm Lily." "Welcome to the street, Lily," I said, walking over. "I'm June. If you ever need anything sugar tape, someone to complain to about the trash pickup, you just knock." She laughed. I might take you up on all three, she said. Her eyes swept the block, then she leaned closer. Everyone's been real nice, she added in a lower voice. Your neighbor up there, what's her name? Miss Carter. She already told me which nights the raccoons go through the trash. She would know, I said, a smile tugging at my lips. Lily glanced up at the second floor window. She said, I pay attention so you don't have to get surprised, baby, she recounted, laughing. She's sweet, little intense, but sweet. I felt something ease in my chest at that. Intense was fine. Intense kept people alive. Later that day, I went to sit with Mrs. Carter, 2 steaming mugs between us. The sky was clear, the street bright in the soft light of late afternoon. We watched Lily wrestle her stroller into the trunk, the dog weaving between her legs like he was trying to sabotage the whole operation. New folks seem all right, I said. So far, Mrs. Carter replied. Got good eyes on each other. That's a start. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind. Does it bother you, knowing what happened in that house before they got there? She took a slow sip, considering. It bothers me that it happened at all, she said. But it doesn't bother me that they're there now. Houses carry stories, June. You can't change that. What you can do is make sure the next story is better than the last. We sat there for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. Kids on bikes rode past, calling to each other. Someone started a lawnmower in the distance. The world kept moving. I keep thinking about that woman, I admitted quietly. The one they took away that night. I wonder how she's doing, if she's okay. Mrs. Carter's gaze softened. I do too, she said. I don't know where she is now, but I know one thing. She ain't in that house with him. And that counts for something. We fell into a comfortable silence after that. I watched as a group of kids set up a game of tag in the middle of the street, shrieking with laughter every time a car came, and they had to scatter to the curb. Their joy echoed between the houses, bouncing off brick and glass and years of other sounds that had lived there before. For the first time in a long time, the street didn't feel like it was holding its breath. It felt watched over, not in a creepy way, in a someone's got eyes on us in case it ever goes bad way. You know, I said eventually, when I first moved here, I thought you were a lot, she snorted. You and everybody else, she replied. I mean it, I went on. I thought you were just being nosy. I told people that too. I laughed at the jokes. And now, I can't stop thinking about how easy it was for us to throw you in that crazy neighbor box, because it meant we didn't have to ask ourselves why you were really watching. She didn't gloat. She didn't say, I told you so. She just gave me this small, knowing smile. We do what we know until we know better, she said. Then, the real test is what we do after we know better. I stared out at the street, watching the way the light glinted off windshields and windows. It struck me how much you can miss when you decide it's safer not to look too closely. I know better now, I said quietly. I know you do, she replied. From that day on, I caught myself moving differently. If someone's voice cracked a little too much in a conversation, I paid attention. If a friend told me, it's not that bad, I'm fine, in a way that didn't match their eyes, I asked again. I didn't become some superhero. I just stopped pretending that not my business was always a noble choice. I still gave people privacy, mind you. I wasn't out here peeping into windows with binoculars. But when something felt wrong, I didn't silence that feeling just because I didn't want to be uncomfortable. I remembered the sound of that woman's scream under the storm. I remembered the silence after. And I remembered the way the street lit up only after the sirens arrived, when it was almost too late. One evening, months later, I was back at my own window when I heard raised voices from down the block. Not the brown house this time, another one, different direction. A heated argument spilling out onto the porch. Old me would have turned up the TV. New me paused, listened, and stayed present. It fizzled out after a minute. Doors slammed, footsteps stomped, no crash, no screams. I let my shoulders drop, but I didn't roll my eyes or make a joke about drama. I just stayed aware, and that alone felt like a different kind of living. Sometimes at night, when the world quiets and my mind wants to replay every what if I've ever lived through, I think about Mrs. Carter at that window. I think about how lonely it must have felt to be the only one willing to see what everyone else worked so hard to ignore. And I think about how, because she chose to keep looking, someone on our street got a chance at another life. We like to call people like her nosy. We call them dramatic. We say they're doing too much. But you want to know the truth. The truth is, sometimes the person you clown the most is the only one standing between your neighborhood and tragedy. Sometimes the one who never minds their business is the only one who remembers that some things are all our business, like safety, like harm, like screams in the middle of the night. Everyone thought she was just nosy. They said it with laughs and rolled eyes and little jokes at barbecues. Now, when I look up at that second floor window and see Mrs. Carter's silhouette, notebook nearby, eyes on the street, I don't see a nosy old woman anymore. I see the one person who refused to look away when it mattered. And every time I tell this story, I hope somebody hearing it thinks twice the next time they hear something that doesn't sound right behind a neighbor's door. I hope they remember the woman in the window who wouldn't let herself forget what it felt like to be unseen. Because at the end of the day, a good street isn't about fresh paint and pretty lawns. It's about whether anybody out there is paying attention when it counts. Everyone thought she was just nosy. Turns out, she was the only one brave enough to never look away.